Hey, welcome back to the Broken Blade. Today we're talking monsters. Specifically monsters in fantasy settings and within the context of tabletop role-playing games. And the goal of this video is to explain what makes monsters distinct from other creatures. But before I can do that, I need to have something to compare my monsters to. So I'm going to start off by providing some working definitions for both animals and people. So first, we'll start off with animals. And everyone understands what an animal is, so I'll make this brief. Animals are sentient creatures, and they're incapable of making moral choices. And most of an animal's behaviors can be explained by their motivations to satisfy and fulfill their basic physiological needs. And now, while animals are neither inherently good or evil, animals do have a form and function which complies with an ordered universe. Meaning that animals are not agents of entropy and chaos, they're more like cogs within a natural machine. So next we have people. Unlike animals, people are sapient creatures, and they can understand both philosophical and moral concepts. And while people are neither inherently good or evil, they do have a conscience which points to goodness, and people are often wrestling with good and evil choices. And when a person does something which they intuitively understand to be evil, they feel a sense of anguish. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm arguing from the standpoint that good and evil are objective truths, and a person's conscience is a reflection of their spirit, and it is not a product of one's environment. So finally, we get to monsters. Now, monsters, like people, are sapient creatures that make moral choices. Unlike people, however, monsters do not possess a conscience which points to goodness. And while people may experience a sense of joy or fulfillment when they perform acts of goodness, monsters find satisfaction when they embrace their darker natures. Now, monsters don't always have to perform objectively evil acts, but even when they're not victimizing others, it's not because they're being directed or guided by a sense of virtue. Monsters are inherently different from people and animals. They are predisposed towards both evil and chaos. Not all monsters are born. It could be that a monster is the product of an animal or a person who's been twisted and corrupted to become a monster. And similarly, there may be opportunities for some monsters to seek redemption and have some sort of positive transformation. Yeah. So now that I've essentially provided my etymology of different creatures, now we'll talk about why it matters. And ideally, once the game master is able to fully embrace the alien psychology of monsters, they'll be able to take on the roles of those creatures and make intuitive decisions that make sense at the table. And it also helps from a world-building perspective to better understand the predispositions and motivations of your creatures. So, for example, if you were to create a dragon, as a game master or as a world builder, you may decide that that dragon's a simple beast and it's something more akin to an animal. And if that's the case, well, it kills men to satisfy its hunger. And maybe it collects treasure to attract mates. It's not making evil choices. But if you wanted your dragon to be a monster, something a little more sinister, well, now the dragon is more like an agent of chaos, and it finds civilization, it finds cities to be repugnant. And when it kills people, it does so out of malice. It has murderous intent. And it collects and hoards treasure because it wants to satisfy its greed. And so in this case, this kind of dragon, the monstrous dragon, is very different than the animal dragon. And it is something which is inherently opposed to both good and order. So a couple of years ago, there was some controversy when D&D changed the alignment of several creatures so that they would no longer be inherently evil. And I recognize that the way in which I have conceptualized monsters for this video is such that there are going to be people who disagree with me. And one of the arguments that I've heard is that making a group of creatures evil or inherently predisposed to evil is somehow bad game design. And I just want to provide my argumentation as to why I don't agree with that. So first, I want to address the argument that by making a creature inherently evil or predisposed to chaos, that you are essentially making every encounter with that creature boring, because ultimately every encounter with that creature will be a combat encounter, and that would rob the players of any sort of meaningful role-playing decisions. But here's the thing. Monsters are sapient creatures. They're not mindless automatons which are compelled to attack adventurers and force them into self-defense situations. In fact, I would even argue that most monsters are probably going to take calculated risks, and some could even be really cowardly and would only attack prey that they are certain they can defeat. And this would mean then that the players would still have opportunities to have interesting interactions with monsters, where maybe they're using their wits to outsmart monsters, they're doing things to evade the monsters. And while players and their characters may not be able to reason with monsters the same way they would another person, they may be able to appeal to a monster's selfish and greedy nature, and therefore have some interesting diplomatic encounters in that way. So another argument I've heard is that by making a group of creatures inherently evil, or in this case monstrous, you are therefore extending an invitation to your characters to kill those creatures without any further justification. And I think this comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes a character heroic and what the attributes of heroism are. Heroes value life. Unlike monsters, heroes do not kill out of convenience, and they are forced to exercise discernment when it comes to employing violence. A really good example of this heroic mindset is Gandalf's conversation with Frodo while they're in Moria. And Frodo laments the fact that Bilbo didn't kill Gollum when he had the opportunity. And while Sméagol's a person, Gollum is very much a monster. And Gandalf concedes that Gollum is probably deserving of death, but he cautions Frodo not to be too eager to take the life of another. And I think this demonstrates the fact that heroes understand the nature of grace, meaning they can extend kindness and mercy to those who are not deserving of it, including monsters. And we see how later in the story, Frodo does just that. He extends kindness and mercy to Gollum, even though Gollum would probably murder Frodo if it had the opportunity. So I want to address some of the potential ethical implications of conceptualizing monsters as I have presented them for this video. And I understand that people have expressed concerns in the past about creating creatures which are inherently evil, and they've even likened that to bioessentialism. But I believe that fantasy stories can present a more cosmic struggle which goes well beyond the petty quarreling of flesh and blood. And I believe in our world, there is very much a real but unseen war between good and evil. And I consider the conflicts between heroes and monsters a way of reflecting the struggle of good and evil and making it physically manifest. In much the same way that heroes are the embodiment of virtue, we can think of monsters as something like dark avatars of malevolence. And I just want to leave you with this, a challenge to embrace the more alien psychology of monsters. And I encourage you out there to conceptualize your monsters as something different and unique and more memorable than just another animal or person. I think as game masters, if we do this, it's also going to make it easier for us to take on the roles of these creatures at the table. And so I hope someone out there found this video valuable. That's all I got for you today. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye.